The Sterling mansion was a fortress of wealth and despair. Mr. Jonathan Sterling, a cold, calculating real estate mogul, presided over a life of impeccable order. Yet his home was shadowed by a profound sadness. His 6-year-old grandson, Leo, was mute. Doctors had offered no medical explanation for his inability to speak, suggesting only selective mutism, possibly triggered by trauma. Leo communicated only through gestures and the haunting, silent intensity of his large, dark eyes. He rarely showed affection, retreating into a world of his own, much to the quiet heartbreak of his parents, Sarah and Mark Sterling. They had tried everything: therapists, specialists, experimental treatments, all to no avail. Leo remained. The only person Leo seemed to tolerate, rather than actively ignore, was Miguel, the mansion's gardener. Miguel was a quiet man in his late 50s, his hands calloused from years of tending to the vast, immaculate gardens. He was an immigrant, a man of few words, his face etched with the lines of a life lived through hardship. He moved through the Sterling estate like a ghost, seen but rarely acknowledged by the family. Yet, whenever Leo was wheeled into the garden by his nanny, his silent gaze would often drift towards Miguel, who would offer a soft, almost imperceptible nod. The annual Sterling Charity Gala was a glittering affair, a display of Jonathan's power and influence. This year, it was held at the mansion. Hundreds of the city's elite mingled in the grand ballroom, their laughter echoing through the halls. Leo, usually shielded from such events, was present for a brief, obligatory appearance. He sat quietly in his wheelchair, his expression vacant, amidst the dazzling display of wealth and superficiality. Sarah, desperate for any breakthrough, had introduced Leo to a renowned child psychologist, Dr. Eris, who was a guest at the gala. Dr. Eris, known for her unconventional methods, decided to try a simple experiment. "Leo," she said gently, kneeling beside his wheelchair, "I want you to point to anyone in this room who makes you feel safe, anyone at all." The room, filled with towering figures of power and influence, grew quiet as everyone watched the mute child. Leo's gaze drifted across the faces of his parents, his grandfather, his aunts, uncles, and the dozens of distinguished guests. His small hand, usually still, began to rise slowly. A hush fell over the room. Everyone leaned in, eager to see who the mute child would choose. Would it be his loving mother, his anxious father, or perhaps the powerful grandfather who commanded the room? Leo's finger continued its slow, deliberate journey, bypassing the glittering guests, past his family, past the renowned psychologist. It pointed with an unwavering certainty towards the open doors of the garden, towards the periphery where the staff moved almost invisibly. The entire family, along with Dr. Eris, turned to follow Leo's silent directive. Their eyes landed on a figure standing near a rose bush, cleaning up after the caterers. It was Miguel, the poor gardener. The family was stunned. Of all the people, the mute child pointed only at the humble gardener. A wave of confusion, embarrassment, and even mild annoyance rippled through the Sterling family. Jonathan Sterling's face, usually impassive, showed a flicker of exasperation. "Miguel?" he muttered under his breath. "What nonsense is this?" Dr. Eris, however, looked intrigued. "This is highly significant," she whispered to Sarah. "He feels a connection there, something profound." Then Dr. Eris did something unexpected. She asked Miguel to approach. Miguel, uncomfortable and confused, slowly made his way towards the center of the ballroom, his gardening clothes a stark contrast to the tuxedos and ball gowns. He stood awkwardly before the powerful family, his eyes cast down. Dr. Eris then asked Leo, "Leo, can you point to Miguel again?" Leo's finger, still raised, immediately pointed directly at Miguel, a tiny flicker of intensity in his eyes. Dr. Eris, undeterred by the family's growing discomfort, then posed her next question. "Leo," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "what is it about Miguel? Can you show us? What do you want Miguel to do?" The room held its breath. The mute child, who only pointed at the poor gardener, now had the attention of everyone. Leo looked at Miguel, then at his own small hand. He then did something that stunned the entire family, something that would unravel a truth far more profound than any of them could have imagined. He slowly, deliberately pointed at Miguel's hands, and then, to the utter shock of everyone present, Leo made a small, clear, but almost imperceptible circular motion with his own finger on Miguel's calloused palm, as if tracing something invisible. The family exchanged bewildered glances. Jonathan Sterling scoffed. "What on earth does that mean?" But Dr. Eris's eyes widened. She saw something, and Miguel, for the first time, looked up, his face paling, a look of profound recognition and fear dawning in his eyes. He knew exactly what the mute child meant, and his next move would stun everyone. The mute child's gesture, a small circular motion on Miguel's calloused palm, sent a chill through the opulent ballroom. The Sterling family saw only a perplexing, meaningless act. Jonathan Sterling dismissed it as childish whimsy. But Dr. Eris saw a clue, and Miguel's sudden paleness and look of dawning fear confirmed it. He knew. What does it mean? Miguel took a deep breath, his gaze shifting to Leo, who was now watching him with an intense, expectant stillness. "It is a story, Señorita Sara," Miguel began, his voice gaining a quiet strength. "A story my abuela, my grandmother, used to tell me. A story of the sleeping star." Jonathan Sterling scoffed loudly. "A story? We are trying to understand my grandson's condition, not listen to folklore." But Dr. Eris held up a hand. "Mr. Sterling, please, let him speak. This could be vital." Miguel explained that the sleeping star was a traditional tale from his village. It was about a child who, in times of great sadness, would lose their voice. To find it again, they had to be reminded of the stars, of their connection to the vast universe, and the unconditional love that bound all living things. The gesture Leo made, the circular motion on the palm, was the first step in the story, representing the turning of the night sky. "My abuela used to trace it on my hand when I was a boy and felt lost," Miguel explained, his eyes misty with memory. "And then she would sing the song of the stars." He looked at Leo, a profound understanding passing between the mute child and the humble gardener. "Leo, he knows this story." Sarah gasped. "But how? How could Leo know a story from your village, Miguel?" Miguel's eyes finally met Jonathan Sterling's, a silent challenge in their depths. "Señor Sterling, I've been your gardener for many years. But before that, I knew your brother, Daniel." Jonathan froze. The name Daniel again. It always came back to Daniel, his free-spirited, artistic brother, who had tragically died years ago, a wound Jonathan had never allowed to heal. He had tried to erase Daniel from their lives. "What are you talking about, Miguel?" Jonathan demanded, his voice dangerously low. "My brother never had any connection to you." Miguel continued, his voice steady. "Daniel was a kind man. He often visited the community center in my old neighborhood. He helped us. He taught children about the stars. My abuela would tell him stories, and he loved the sleeping star. He said he would tell it to his own children one day." Sarah and Mark exchanged confused glances. Jonathan's face, however, was growing paler. A terrible realization was beginning to dawn on him. This wasn't just folklore. It was a connection to his lost brother, and a secret he had aggressively suppressed. Dr. Eris, sensing the rising tension, intervened. "Miguel, what is the next step in the sleeping star story? Can you show us?" Miguel nodded. He knelt before Leo, ignoring the bewildered crowd. He gently took Leo's hand, and with his thumb, began to trace a series of small, specific patterns on Leo's palm, like tiny constellations. As he did so, he began to hum, a soft, low melody. It was a simple, ancient tune, full of warmth and comfort. And as Miguel hummed, a miracle began to unfold. Leo's eyes, previously distant, grew brighter. His small fingers, usually still, began to twitch. He watched Miguel with an intensity that pulled everyone into their silent world. And then, Leo's lips, which had been sealed for years, began to move. A small, almost imperceptible sound escaped him. Not a word, but a soft, guttural hum, mimicking Miguel's melody. Sarah cried out, a sound of pure, unadulterated hope. "Leo, did you hear that, Elias? He made a sound." Jonathan Sterling stared, completely transfixed. The gardener he had barely acknowledged, the man he considered he was reaching Leo. Miguel continued to hum, his eyes fixed on Leo's. Then, slowly, Leo lifted his hand and with trembling fingers tried to imitate Miguel's tracing gesture on his own palm. It was clumsy, but it was an attempt. It was communication. The room, once filled with polite chatter, was now completely silent. Everyone watching this profound, raw exchange between a mute child and a humble gardener. Jonathan Sterling felt a cold dread wash over him, mixed with a terrifying, dawning understanding. This simple story, this song, this connection to Daniel, it was more than just folklore. It was a key not just to Leo's voice, but to a hidden truth that Jonathan had desperately tried to bury. The mute child pointed only at the poor gardener, and the family was stunned by his next move. A move that unlocked not just a child's voice, but a forgotten past and a secret that would shake the Sterling family to its very core. Leo's soft hum, his trembling attempt to mimic Miguel's gesture, sent a jolt of raw emotion through the Sterling ballroom. Sarah rushed forward, tears streaming down her face, kneeling beside Leo and Miguel. Jonathan Sterling, however, stood frozen, his mind reeling. The connection to Daniel, the simple sleeping star story, and Miguel's quiet confidence, it all pointed to something Jonathan had ruthlessly suppressed. Dr. Eris, ever the astute observer, intervened. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice firm, "Miguel seems to have a unique bond with Leo, one that is clearly therapeutic. We need to understand the full extent of this connection to Daniel." Jonathan's gaze flickered to Miguel, then back to Leo, whose eyes were now brighter, more engaged than they had been in years. The shame and anger at his own ignorance warred with a desperate hope for his grandson. "Miguel," Jonathan said, his voice unusually strained, "come to my study immediately after this, alone. We need to talk." As the gala slowly dispersed, leaving behind a bewildered murmuring, Jonathan, still reeling, made his way to his study. Miguel arrived shortly after, his gardening uniform a stark contrast to the opulent room. "Sit, Miguel," Jonathan ordered, his usual imperious tone softened by a tremor of uncertainty. "Now, tell me everything. About Daniel, about Leo, about that story." Miguel, no longer intimidated, spoke with quiet dignity. He recounted how Daniel, Jonathan's bohemian artist brother, had spent time volunteering at a community center in Miguel's old neighborhood. Daniel, fascinated by local culture, had befriended Miguel's grandmother, a revered storyteller. He had learned the Sleeping Star and its accompanying song, promising to share it with his future children. "Daniel told me," Miguel continued, his voice softer, "a boy named Leo. He said he was going to save enough money, find his son, and raise him with love, teaching him the Sleeping Star and all the wonders of the universe. Jonathan gasped. A secret son? Daniel had a son? He had never known. Daniel's life had been chaotic, his whereabouts often unknown. After his death, Jonathan had simply taken over the legal guardianship of his orphaned nephew, Leo, assuming Leo was merely the result of a casual encounter. His mother having disappeared, he had never bothered to investigate further, burying Daniel's memory and Leo's true origins under a mountain of work and grief. Yes, Senor Sterling, Miguel confirmed. Daniel loved his son. He spoke of him constantly. He even showed he had been so consumed by his own grief for Daniel, so disgusted by what he perceived as Daniel's irresponsible lifestyle, that he had never once considered Daniel might have been actively trying to be a father. He had taken Leo, a mute, traumatized child, and placed him in the sterile, emotionless environment of the Sterling mansion, believing he was providing the best for him. He realized with a horrifying clarity that Leo's mutism wasn't just trauma. It was potentially the direct consequence of being separated from his true father's intended love and legacy. Daniel's desire to teach Leo, the sleeping star, was not a whimsical notion. It was a promise, a spiritual inheritance. Miguel, the poor gardener, was the only one who carried that inheritance. My God, Jonathan whispered, burying his face in his hands. I never knew. I never asked. I assumed. I made him an orphan, not once, but twice. I took him from Daniel's dream. He looked up at Miguel, his eyes filled with a raw, agonizing remorse. Miguel, why are you telling me this now? Why didn't you say something sooner? Miguel's eyes, soft but firm, met Jonathan's. Senor Sterling, I tried. After Daniel's accident, I went to your office. I told your security I knew Daniel, that he had a son. They dismissed me. They called me a delusional immigrant trying to get money. You had closed off your heart, Senor. You would not have listened. Jonathan felt a profound wave of shame. He remembered those directives, his own orders to keep undesirables away, especially anyone claiming a connection to Daniel's chaotic past. He had built a fortress around his grief, and in doing so, he had blocked out the truth about his brother, and the truth about his grandson. What do I do, Miguel? Jonathan asked, his voice stripped of all authority, raw with desperation. How can I make this right? How can I help Leo? Miguel looked at the powerful billionaire, then at the photo of Daniel. You must honor Daniel's dream, Senor Sterling. You must become the guardian of the sleeping star. You must bring the stars and the love back into Leo's life. Jonathan Sterling, the man who had only ever valued power and control, was suddenly faced with a task far greater than any business deal. He had to learn how to love, how to connect, and how to undo years of his own emotional neglect. The mute child had pointed only at the poor gardener, and that simple gesture had not only revealed a devastating family secret, but had forced a broken man to confront his deepest failures, offering him a terrifying yet hopeful path to redemption. He had to learn the story of the sleeping star. Jonathan Sterling's life, once a meticulously ordered spreadsheet of assets and liabilities, had been irrevocably shattered by a mute child's pointing finger and a gardener's forgotten story. The truth of Daniel's secret son, Leo, and his profound connection to Miguel, the poor gardener, was a bitter pill. Jonathan, the man who had always sought control, now found himself utterly at the mercy of emotions he had long suppressed: guilt, shame, and a desperate yearning for redemption. His immediate priority was Leo. He swallowed his pride and humbly asked Miguel to stay, not as a gardener, but as Leo's primary caregiver and guide. Miguel, seeing the genuine remorse in Jonathan's eyes, agreed. He was given a comfortable residence on the estate, and his expertise in the sleeping star became the core of Leo's therapy. Jonathan also involved Sarah and Mark, revealing the full, painful truth about Daniel and Leo's true heritage. They were heartbroken by the missed years, but united in their desire to help Leo. The transformation in the Sterling mansion was profound. The sterile, silent corridors began to echo with soft hums and gentle conversations. Miguel spent hours with Leo, patiently tracing the sleeping star constellations on his palm, humming the ancient melody. Slowly, painstakingly, Leo began to respond. His hums grew louder, more consistent. His eye contact sharpened. He started using more elaborate gestures, not just pointing, but communicating complex ideas through a combination of signs and sounds, guided by Miguel's wisdom. Jonathan, once distant, began to participate actively. He spent evenings in the garden with Leo and Miguel, learning about the stars, about the sleeping star, and about Daniel's dream. He bought a powerful telescope, not for show, but for actual use, and learned to identify constellations with Miguel's help. He felt a connection to his lost brother through Leo, a profound bond that finally began to heal his grief. The cold, calculating billionaire was slowly rediscovering his own humanity, guided by the very man he once considered beneath him. Dr. Eris continued to observe Leo's progress, astounded by the breakthrough. She noted that Leo's mutism wasn't just trauma. It was a deep spiritual disconnect that only the sleeping star narrative could bridge. Miguel, with his cultural heritage, provided the missing piece that Western medicine had overlooked. This realization prompted Jonathan to establish the Daniel Sterling Foundation, a philanthropic endeavor dedicated to funding alternative therapies for children with trauma-related mutism, focusing on cultural and narrative-based healing methods. Miguel became a key advisor for the foundation, ensuring its programs were rooted in genuine understanding and community wisdom. The foundation also created safe spaces for immigrant families, offering support and cultural preservation programs, a direct atonement for Jonathan's past prejudice. His empire, once built on ruthless acquisition, began to pivot towards social impact. He integrated ethical practices and community welfare into Thorn Ventures, ensuring fair wages, respectful treatment, and opportunities for all employees, regardless of background. His employees, once wary, now saw a leader who embodied compassion, a profound change from the man he once was. 1 year after the infamous gala, a new, much smaller gathering took place at the Sterling mansion. It was Leo's birthday. The mood was joyous, filled with genuine warmth. Leo, no longer mute, though still quiet, was communicating freely with his family and Miguel through a combination of signs, hums, and occasionally soft, clear words. He was teaching Chloe, his cousin, the sleeping star song. His voice, a soft, beautiful melody. Jonathan watched them, tears in his eyes. He approached Miguel. "Miguel," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved him. You saved us. You taught me the meaning of true wealth, true connection." Miguel smiled, his eyes twinkling. "No, Senor Sterling. Leo saved us. He pointed the way. He showed us that the smallest voice can reveal the greatest truth." The mute child had pointed only at the poor gardener, a simple gesture that had detonated a series of profound revelations. It had uncovered a buried family secret, exposed a billionaire's deep-seated prejudices, and ultimately forced him on a journey of redemption that transformed his heart and his empire. Jonathan Sterling, the man who had once dismissed a gardener as irrelevant, had learned that the greatest wisdom, the purest love, and the most profound truths often resided in the most unexpected places, revealed by the most vulnerable among us. His grandson's voice, a melody of the sleeping star, was the symphony of his own rebirth, a testament to the fact that true wealth lies not in what one possesses, but in the connections one makes, and the truths one dares to unfold.